You're listening to Tabletop Arcanum, a podcast dedicated to learning and exploring the hobby of tabletop gaming. Your hosts are Justin Taylor and Richard Giese, so sit back and relax as we talk, discuss, and joke our way through the hobby we love so much. The end of the world draws near. The world stands at the brink of catastrophe. The year is 1926, and the elder of unfathomable power threatens to awaken from its long slumber, bringing death and madness in its wake. Strange cults and unspeakable monsters wreak havoc in every continent as the fabric of reality tears itself apart, opening gates to bizarre other worlds. A few brave investigators understand what is truly happening. These tenacious souls come from every walk of life to pit their skills and weapons against the threat of the Ancient One. It falls to them to explore the most remote corners of the globe, to fight the marish creatures that lurk in the shadows, and to find answers of the ancient mysteries of this Eldritch Horror. Welcome to Tabletop Arcanum. This is Justin, and I bring to you a complete review of Eldritch Horror from Fantasy of Flight Games. This was designed by Corey Konecka and Nikki Valens. This is a 1 to 8 player game, plays in 2 to 4 hours. MSRP is $59.95. Now that's the core game. There's also 8 expansions for this one. 4 small box expansions at $24.95 and 4 large box expansions at $49.95. We're going to be talking about all of them a little bit, but let's first dive into our first impressions of Eldritch Horror. We'll pop back in the Wayback Machine back to about 2013 when Eldritch Horror was kind of shown off at Arkham Nights. And it was, we're making another Arkham Horror game. This time, it's on a grand global scale. Instead of playing in the sleepy town of Arkham, Massachusetts, and that is just one location of among many you can visit in Eldritch Horror as you globetrot, fly, take a train, take a bus, take a path through the jungle, or maybe just take an ocean liner across one of the seas to transport your way across the weird happenings that are all over the world because an ancient one's coming up for you. Now, all of that's actually taken on a bigger global scale. So, first impressions, like, alright, this is bigger, badder Arkham Horror. And what it really did, first impression wise, is it cleaned up a lot of the fiddly mechanics that Arkham Horror 2nd Edition had. And it's not really a 3rd edition, because that comes later in the timeline here, but it actually acts as a stepping stone, kind of like a 2.5 edition, but with a different focus, because instead of working on the individual happenings of the town, we're happening on a global scale. So the lens has been drawn back, and now we're dealing with a global threat of this Ancient One, instead of it just wrecking some cultists in a nearby area. Now, a lot of the mechanics are very similar. You'll take your turns, you'll move around the board, encounter your space, which will usually have some flavor text and some options and some skill checks. But a lot of the mechanics are a little bit more optional. When you're at a space, if there's a gate there and a clue there and it happens to be Rome, you can have a choice of encounters opposed to being forced to a specific one, which gives you a little bit more control over what you get to do per the game, per the day. Other nice things that I will say first impression wise is it looks clean. It looks beautiful, and a big giant poster board of this map is definitely something that is pretty cool to see on the table. Diving deeper into what does Eldritch Horror do well? I've already kind of hinted at some of it, but one of the things that it does well is it takes a lot of the mechanics and gameplay and gives you a little bit more choice, a little bit more freedom, and a bigger global focus on that. This is literally the end of the world. There is nothing coming back if you do not win against this Ancient One. Unlike Arkham Horror, one of the things Arkham Horror does, you usually had like this pulp action-y standoff with the Ancient One in a last all holds bar sort of thing. Eldritch Horror kind of got rid of that. If the Ancient One actually wakes up, the game becomes incredibly hard to beat. It's already a tough game, but if you let that doom track hit 0 and the Ancient One wakes up, you have to not only finish your mysteries that you're supposed to do to start to win the game, but then you have to defeat them in like a final showdown mystery, and that is, I honestly, in all my years of playing Eldritch Horror, I've never once been able to pull that off. Usually when that happens, it's usually game over. In a lot of good senses, you have a lot of familiar faces and characters that show up from the other Arkham Files games in here. It's a very familiar cast of characters, and you have little variances of their abilities that make more sense for each game. The character cards themselves, they have different skills, and you can actually improve those skills and get bonuses to them, opposed to the sliding skill of where you have to hurt your speed in order to increase your sneak. You have to drop your will to increase your fight that Arkham 2nd Edition kind of had you do. So this is a little bit more flatlined in that sense, and is a good plus. Now, one other thing that it does do is we have a lot of different conditions and things of that nature that you can encounter and get, and when you start adding all the expansions, there's a lot of different variations of that. There's a downside to that too. We'll get to that when we get to the opportunities. But looking at the other pluses, there's 8 expansions for this game. That's a lot. Some of them are small box expansions that added a couple ancient ones, a couple investigators, and really just kind of adds a small snippet. For example, Strange Remnants, for example, adds Mystic Ruins, which is a secondary adventure type. So the core game has a standard adventure type. Mystic Ruins adds another one of those. More importantly, one of the things that they did start adding after the core game is the focus action. And this is a fantastic little thing. You get 2 actions per turn, but there's a lot of circumstances you may not have something to do on that second action because you cannot do the same action twice in this game. So they gave the focus action as an ability to take a focus token, which gives you a free reroll. Prior to that, you only could reroll die by spending a very valuable clue token, and I almost saw that never happening unless you had a somehow surplus of clues, which was, again, uncommon to happen. The other small box expansions like Cities of Ruin added some ancient ones, but then they also added the ability to have rubble and devastation markers come out and give you a little bit of a small flare without expanding too much on the board itself. Signs of Carcosa didn't add too much to it, just again, some more investigators, another ancient one, some more general encounters for the board. Forsaken Lore, very much similar thing. We kind of added and enhanced some things that were in there. One of the things that Forsaken Lore kind of tricked in there was Lost in Time and Space, which is of course a very fun Arkham-y encounter set that you can have. So there's a lot of fun stuff that each mini expansion adds, and then the main expansions, or the big box expansions, I really count that there are 3 main box expansions, and there's the final expansion. So you have At the Mountains of Madness, Under the Pyramids, and the Dreamlands, and all 3 of them add a sideboard expanding either expedition into Antarctica, expanding Africa itself and kind of the Egypt area, or the Dreamlands, which adds a whole other world, the Dreamlands, that you can run around and explore in. One thing to note on those, which is I'm going to put it on my opportunity pile, but good to know and call out early, is all 3 of those sideboards can either come in with a prelude card, which is either chosen or randomly generated, and there's only one of them that spawns each of the sideboards, or a specific ancient one in play will also generate it. So you don't ever really see the sideboards in play all that often unless you choose it to be so. The final expansion that came out was Masks of Nyarlathotep. This was a super exciting expansion when it was announced for me because it definitely included a lot of things that I was looking for, like, hey, how do I make a campaign out of Eldritch Horror? And then they added one of my favorite options that Arkham Horror 2nd Edition had, and it was personal stories. And personal stories were like little personal missions that each investigator had, and if you made the pass effect, you would get a special bonus for your character, and if you had a fail effect, you would get a little penalty on yourself. And the rewards and penalties are very balanced. If it's something easy to get, the reward isn't too powerful. If it's tough to get, it will be definitely more significant. And likewise, if it's a penalty that you can easily fall yourself into because the doom track hits an X point before you complete the mission, the penalty isn't so devastating that you cannot continue to play. One other fantastic thing that they added in this game is when your investigator is wounded or goes insane, they actually have a story effect that other investigators can encounter your deceased or lost investigator, get a little of a story flavor of what happened to them, and then pick up their stuff. It has a little RPG element to it, and the global story is really the big focus on this one. So we're looking not necessarily at the individual story of Bob Jenkins salesman or Charlie Kane the politician. We're looking at what is happening in the world, what is this ancient one doing, and what sort of weird, crazy, kooky portals are opening up that you're encountering. I do have a personal favorite encounter card in this game. I have one in 2nd edition as well, but in Eldritch Horror, I will have to say it is an otherworld encounter that you go into the past and you're carefully listening in and you find a younger version of yourself. And if you're careful, you can warn yourself of the dangers of the future and gain some bonuses, but if you're not careful, your dad kicks in the door with a shotgun and bad stuff happens to you. Love it for that. I don't know why. It's just a fun thematical thing of you are the monster in your closet. It is kind of where I always take that one from. Now, all that being said, that's a lot of good stuff. It does play up to 8 players. Like most of the other Arkham File games, the more players you have, the longer the game goes. You do want to make sure this one runs at even players because every even player count, the amount of bad stuff that happens on the game's turns, clue spawn, monster spawn, gates opening will increase every other player. So if I'm playing solo, I will either play 2 characters or 4 characters if I'm feeling a bit frisky. Or if we are playing, let's say I have 3 people playing a game, I will then ask, hey, can we play a 4th NPC character, and kind of choose as a group what that character does, because there's no real penalty for adding a extra character when you're already at odd count. Eldritch Horror has this grand scope of things, and while that is a very big plus in my category, and I love it for that, and it has this big, long, epic feeling of the game as you go through and you battle very hard, I will shift right into my opportunities on this game, because you can be playing for 2 hours to solve one of your 2 or 3 mysteries needed on an ancient one, and a card can flip and reset that mystery on you. And essentially, those 2 hours feel like they were completely lost. So when this game kicks you when you're down, it really kicks you when you're down, and there's very little you can do to stop it. One of the other opportunities is the investigator's personal stories gets a little lost unless you add that personal missions from the Mask expansion, but I feel like that's just more of the shift of the focus of the game. I really enjoyed one of the things that Arkham Horror 2nd Edition had was the personal flavor of the investigators running through the town, where this one really feels like it is more of a team effort. You're taking the side seat because the global stage is the big thing. That's my personal take on it. A lot of people do love Eldritch Horror and do not see that as a problem, but that's just something I personally find was a little disheartening that the characters fell a little bit to the side ground. That being said, if you don't have Arkham Horror 2nd Edition, the Arkham Horror LCG card game puts the investigators right back in the spotlight, as does Mansions of Madness to some degree. So it's just not in Eldritch Horror, but other Arkham games still have that flavor, and that's where I feel there's nothing so wrong with it that we're totally missing out. Likewise, in our Arkham Horror Final Hour review, the characters, stories, and flavor are still present in Eldritch Horror enough that you do feel like you're playing these characters and not just a random deck of cards. It's there, it's just taking a big sideline. One of the other big things with Eldritch Horror is setup and teardown of this game is kind of daunting. You could do a lot of things to improve that, but when you have everything, there are a ton of ancient ones, and each ancient one has 2 or 3 small decks that go along with it. Definitely make sure you organize those in the best way you can, because you only use a fraction of those cards every time. Likewise, when you get more than just the core game, one good bonus is the encounter cards increase, which is one of the downsides of the core only experience, is you run through the location encounters very quickly and you see the same ones pop up semi-regularly. When you start adding expansions, that problem goes away, but it creates a secondary problem. Your condition deck gets more and more unwieldy, and the conditions are usually negative effects, like you break your leg, you're poisoned, you may be cursed, maybe wanted by the police. Lots of different things can happen in there. Madnesses are also part of it, and they all have little subtext, and one of the things the game likes to do is it likes to give you a random madness condition. Well, now you have to sift through this like 5-inch high mini card deck for your first random madness, and it is not the easiest thing to do. What I would recommend anyone with the full experience to do is you can subsort those condition decks down into about 6 miniature decks based on conditions, because there are certain cards that will only look for madness or they will look for an injury, and you can have those as separate options. I know that is on Board Game Geek as far as which ones should be sorted into which piles, and I highly recommend that you do that. It will save you a ton of time. Also, if you have a lot of players, divide those around the players, and then when it comes to do, that player's job is, hey, you're the madness player. When someone needs a madness, you dish it out to them. Some things I've discovered to help facilitate, keep everybody engaged on the table. The one big thing I need to call out is all the big box expansions are $50 expansions. They're not small stuff, but you're getting multiple investigators. You're getting a sideboard. You're getting a bunch of cards, and that's quite a bit. To give you an idea, you're getting 8 investigators and 2 ancient ones per big box expansion, but you're only getting 4 investigators and 1 ancient one for the small box expansions. Twice the price, twice the investigators, twice the ancient ones. The exception to this rule is Masks of Nyarlathotep, who does give you 7 new investigators and 2 ancient ones, plus a plethora of unique cards, but you don't get that sideboard. Instead, you get the pile of 55 personal mission cards for every of the investigators. And it just feels like it's such a letdown compared to the other ones. I do recommend this being the last expansion you pick up out of everything. As far as order of operations, I would definitely get a big box expansion, probably first just to get your influx of different characters and different ancient ones, and then probably switch to one of the small box box expansions. My personal favorite is Dreamlands for the big box and Strange Remnants for the small boxes. So those are the two I would say target first, and then kind of fill in as they catch your eyes. One other thing that Mask does do, and I will put this in a small plus column, is they did add resource tokens as another option to do something with, because you can only have 2 focus tokens. So you can also gather resources, and those can help you heal a little bit faster and do a little bit more on your turn. But ultimately, the expansion felt underwhelming for the price point. So there is a lot in Eldritch Horror to unpack. At the $59.95 price point for just the core game, I believe it is a fantastic deal, because you do get a 2 to 4 hour game. Probably more 4 hours to possibly 5 or 6 is what I've potentially have seen when you get over 4 players and you need to teach the game or do other aspects to it. If you prioritize your setup and takedown time, you can cut some of that out. I have played Eldritch Horror games pretty quickly, but that's usually with 4 or less players and usually very experienced players at the same time. I can get under that 2 hour count barely, even with that sort of setup and that sort of group. It is definitely a longer haul game, a little bit chunkier. Make sure you prep yourself for that when you play Eldritch Horror. At the $59.95 price point, because you get good gameplay length, you get a lot of replayability of the ancient ones and different conditions that can pop up. You do still need a little bit more of one of the expansions to boost your encounter card piles a little bit more, to kind of get a little bit more flavor on those. The game has creeped up in price over time. I still think it's a pretty good deal at the $59.95 price point, but if you can get it under $50, it is definitely worth it at that point. That all being said, I highly do recommend Eldritch Horror for most heavily thematic games that are out there. You get a grand global scale, you have a lot of characters to choose from, you have a lot of options to put into the game, a lot of ancient ones to battle. So a lot of games will have similar tones, but will definitely have different ups and downs and aha moments and oh no moments. And almost every Eldritch Horror game I've played has always kind of felt like a seat on the pants sort of win, where you're always about a turn or two away from losing, and you always feel like you're just sneaking in that win. I almost never have gotten, in these almost 10 years of playing this game, a feature that where, hey, maybe that was a little too easy. So that has been the Tabletop Arcanum's review of Eldritch Horror from Fantasy Flight Games. If you like to find us on social media, you can do so on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We're also on YouTube. Make sure you hit those like, follow, subscribe buttons so you get notified that we have new content available for you. Drop us a line, comment, or anything you like. Thank you for listening, and happy gaming. You've been listening to Tabletop Arcanum, produced by Justin Taylor. This episode is hosted by Justin Taylor. Mixing and editing by Richard Giese. Original theme by Paul Moore and Issac Gilbert. Check the description for this episode's featured background music. You can follow us on most social media platforms. Be sure to like, subscribe, and follow, and leave us a review if you would. As always, thanks for listening.